Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ground Game with your Cabarrus County Republican Party. As always, I am Abdul Ali. On behalf of Scott and Anita and our entire executive committee, we want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and share this content. And for my man G to the Mills behind the camera, we want to thank every single one of you guys that shared this content. Today, we've got some very special and important guests. We are going to be joined by Representative Dr. Kristin Baker, who represents us here in the 82nd District. And we're also going to have State Senator Paul Newton, who represents Cabarrus County in the North Carolina State Senate District 36. We're going to be right back with those folks, but first, here's your municipal calendar. Ladies and gentlemen, here is your Cabarrus County municipal calendar. On Monday, October the 12th at 6 p.m., it's going to be a busy day in Cabarrus County. We've got Kannapolis City Council, the Mount Pleasant Town Council, the Harrisburg Town Council, and your Cabarrus County Board of Education all meeting at 6 p.m. On Tuesday, October the 13th at 6 p.m., your Midland Town Council will meet. Then, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, early voting does start here in Cabarrus County on October the 15th. So make sure if you're going to vote early, that starts on October the 15th. And then finally, on October the 19th at 6:30 p.m., your Cabarrus County Board of Commissioners will meet, and the final meeting for your Kannapolis City Council will be Monday at 6 p.m. on October the 19th. That again is your Cabarrus County municipal calendar. All right. We are back on Ground Game. As promised, I have with us a very good friend of everybody here in Cabarrus County, Dr. Kristin Baker. Welcome to Ground Game.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate being invited.
So this is a very interesting time for us here in the district. You having taken the late Linda Johnson's position, I'm just going to ask you first, what has been the most memorable experience so far about serving in the legislature?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So I think two things. One is people were very kind and embracing of me. That would be one really big point. I was lucky enough that her legislative assistant, Rhonda Todd, stayed with me. And so, our community has benefited from her expertise and the wisdom she has from all the experience with Representative Johnson. So that was really helpful. And I think otherwise, in terms of memorable, starting during COVID, definitely is going to have to rank right up there, So I started virtually. And so no real onboarding in the legislature, and it was all done virtually without, their computer and that kind of thing. So anyway, learned a lot, and people were very patient. So.
Good deal. So you are an actual medical professional, unlike, I think there's only one other medical doctor in the legislature.
That's correct. Dr. Perrin Jones also is in the House. And so both physicians are in the House. So we're very fortunate right now.
Fantastic. So it sounds like to me, having that background in the medical field, you know what's going on. You're in the know about this whole COVID situation. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. But one of the big things is you being in the State House, you were appointed to a commission, a justice committee, and tell the folks about that, because that's super important. I think they need to know about that.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, I was really honored. It's been a privilege to help co-chair the task force that Speaker Moore decided to initiate, and it's a very interesting one. So it's called the Task Force on Community Relations, Law Enforcement, and Justice. And it was a response to what we were feeling, that our communities were really hurting, and that, post the horrible George Floyd incident, people said, you've got to understand what we're going through. And so what's really neat and, different about this particular task force is that it does include community members as well. So it is legislators, yes, but also law enforcement and then community members from across the state. And one of the big things is that the work that's being done by the task force, a lot of that is grassroots in the community. And so people's voices can really be heard. But also what's important about this is that at the end, we're going to have specific recommendations. So it's not just, we're hurting, please listen to us. That's key, right? And we have to start with that. But that is not where we're going to stop. And we're going to bring, absolute, clear, specific recommendations so that we can make progress, and that people not only know that they are viewed equally, but they believe that. And Absolutely. They experience that.
One of the things I hear a lot of is, and especially, with Freckles this close together, is that people tend to think Republicans don't care about law enforcement, improving law enforcement. Like, we just think they're perfect. And I think part of what you guys are doing is some improvements to law enforcement in some of the bills you're working on. So I'd love to talk about a little bit about how law enforcement and what you guys are doing to improve that through that task force.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for asking about that. I think that, so we've had presentations by those in academia who have studied the numbers around, these incidents and law enforcement and the criminal justice system. So we've got those numbers and those are being presented, but then we also have members from law enforcement. And what has been really striking is there are so many good people in law enforcement, and they're like, we don't want the bad actors, help us get there. And so some of the discussions in our last task force meeting, which was just a couple of weeks ago, included things like, what are we going to do about officers who are not decertified? So what happens is they call them gypsy officers. And when they get decertified, that stops things. But some don't get decertified and they just move on to the next job. So how are we going to track that and prevent that from happening? Other things that have been brought forth are whistleblower issues. So while the state officials are protected by whistleblower laws, municipals are not. And so those are things that we can do to say, all right, look, help us identify. This is not who, the law enforcement is saying to us, this is not who we are. Yes, this does happen.
Right.
And yes, it must stop. But this is not who we are. Help us to be better at preventing these horrible incidents. So that has been really encouraging. And again, we're just in the process. We've got a meeting next week. We've got 2 more scheduled, even just within these next, 6 weeks or so. So we're really moving fast to try and bring to bear some actual change and to ease the burden that people are absolutely living under.
Which is a great way to segue into some of the things we were talking about off air about what you guys in the House have done in these last sessions. So I think it's really important for folks to know what you guys have done in the realm of healthcare and mental health and things like that. So please let the folks know about some of the things you've done in that regard, because I think that's hugely important.
Thank you. Yes. And that's where it's been really a privilege and a learning opportunity to see how the work of the legislature continues. So that's been really fortunate. Even though we recessed, in the summer, we came back when there was care funding that came down from the federal government. We came back in to allocate that to so many hurting people. And so, as a child psychiatrist, one of my great passions is those who are most vulnerable in our society, right? And so it's just been such a privilege to be part of that. So we reconvened in the beginning of September, and some of the things we were able to do included being able to provide funding for healthcare. So we supplied about $235 million of the federal funds to go directly to healthcare, PPE and all kinds of COVID-related healthcare, and then also 38 million of that went straight to behavioral health, to our LME and MCOs. And again, of course, and we can get more into this, but I know we have limited time. But we have baseline about 50% of our population who is suffering mental health issues does not get help. Well, now, but by our studies, that the number of people suffering with mental health issues has increased by 1/3. So in terms of depression and anxiety, which makes sense with all we're going through with COVID and all the recent challenges. And so being able to provide more funding to that has been a real opportunity. And so, vulnerability in terms of healthcare. Then what about our students, right? Our students and families who are hurting. Well, we were able to provide, $335 for all these families to be a supplement, that extra credit, grant that we've been able to give. But these students still are really, schools are struggling, in this COVID environment and needing to teach remotely. So in addition to broadband, we've done some really important measures in terms of, so district schools. One of the big things that we heard all across the state was, we need some hold harmless for our ADM or our average daily membership. So as you probably know, district schools are funded in relation to the number of students they think they'll have.
Right.
And they do their best to project that. Well, COVID obviously blew that out of the water, right? So we don't want our schools suffering for that. And we want to be able to maintain the good teachers and keep them. And so we wanted that funding to go forward. So we were we're really delighted to be able to pass that. Then in addition, well, what about our students who are not in district schools, right? What about school choice? Done amazing things there as well. Just so fortunate that we've been all able to work together in the legislature to advance these important initiatives for our communities. And so we've done several things. So in terms of virtual schools, we increased enrollment for children in charter and virtual schools. We have 2 in the state, and so we increased enrollment by 3,800.
Wow,
right there.
that's great.
And then in other, because again, the parent, something as a psychiatrist I strongly believe is it's the parent that's the expert on their children, and we want them to be able to make the choice for their student. And so in terms of school choice and school opportunities, we were able to take away some of the barriers to and limits on kindergarten and first grade numbers for school choice. So that got rid of those waiting lists.
Wow.
Able to do that. So we've done a lot in that regard. And then also for exceptional children. I know we're short on time. And so, but we've also been able to fund grants for exceptional children who, of course, the most vulnerable suffer the most when we go through crises like this. And we want to support them and add to that. So we've done a lot for schools. And then also we put some money towards elections. We want people to be able to get out and vote and do so safely. And so we know we needed more poll workers and things like that. So we were able to provide monies towards that. So just a lot of important work.
Well, we're going to be right back. We're not going anywhere. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Dr. Kristin Baker here on Ground Game.
Politicians play politics, but Dr. Kristin Baker isn't a politician. She's a physician and political outsider who's dedicated her career to people, not politics. Baker's running to fix our broken system and defend conservative values in Raleigh. She'll cut taxes, crack down on sanctuary cities, and protect the unborn. Politicians play politics. Dr. Kristin Baker helps people. Pro-life Christian, lifelong Republican. Dr. Kristin Baker for State House.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on Ground Game with Representative Dr. Kristin Baker with us here. I know we've covered a lot of ground. We covered a lot of stuff, really important stuff. But one thing I did want to make sure we touched on is you are up for election here in Cabarrus County, which is really important. I know you've got a lot of support here in the community, but in this election cycle, how important do you think it is for folks to turn up, show out, and vote?
Oh gosh, never more important. Absolutely never more important. And I think that, these issues are hitting our doorstep, right? Sometimes during elections, there are philosophical differences and policy issues, but they feel a little removed. We've all been through it. And so I'm really, the silver lining of that is I think that's going to make people turn out. This matters to people, and it should. And so again, that's part of why we supplied money for elections. We want people to get out. We want to make it safe. We want to make it accessible. And so, yes, it's just could not be more important. We've got so many issues on the line right now. Healthcare, obviously, right? And safety, so big. Right? And what we do about our police and whether we support them or not. What do we think about pro-life? What are the issues? And they're hitting our doorstep right now. And so yes, I really encourage everyone to get out. And if there's anything I can do to help, I know people locally here are offering rides. A couple of the voting stations have changed to provide bigger settings so people can spread out and be safe. And so I know that people are offering rides and transportation. So just let us know if there's anything that we can do to help make this more accessible.
So ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Kristin Baker, representative for us here at Cabarrus County in the 82nd District. We are looking 83rd, 82nd?
82nd, you got it.
See, I was right.
We've redistricted a couple times.
So it's redistrict juggling and stuff going on. But you'll see her campaign information somewhere on the screen up there. And we hope to have you back on Ground Game after the election as we can have you as our representative again. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
Mike Causey has a proven record fighting for North Carolina consumers. He's taken on big insurance over auto and home rate hikes, stood against health insurance titans, and rooted out corruption with the FBI. Mike Causey, Commissioner of Insurance.
Welcome back to Ground Game, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to have a good friend of mine, somebody I consider a brother in Christ, a strong advocate for the folks in this district in the state Senate, none other than State Senator Paul Newton. Welcome to Ground Game, brother.
Thank you, Abdul. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I know we've got a lot of stuff to talk about as far as what you guys have done in the Senate, but having this be, the COVID year, 2020 is like year apocalypse is what we're calling it around these parts. You guys have done some really big and important work in the Senate, and the first thing I want to talk about, I didn't mention this off air, is you guys have done a lot of work to protect small businesses. And a lot of small businesses here in Cabarrus County could definitely benefit from hearing about some of those things. But what to you is the most important thing that you guys have done in the state Senate to protect small businesses throughout this pandemic?
Great question, Abdul. We did a number of things, and I'll try to touch on a couple of them. But I think the single most important thing we did was we provided protection, immunity against lawsuits when and if a business is ever able to reopen. So, we've got a governor that decided some businesses were essential, others were not. So some were opening, some were not. Who knew what the pattern was going to be? And this also applies to educational institutions, both K through 12 and higher ed. So what happens when we reopen when there's no true, clear, discernible standard of care? Don't wear masks, social distance, and the rules of the game just continued to change. And so we immediately recognized that as a vulnerability for our business community in particular, education institutions as well. Because what we have, unfortunately, in this country is that litigation and trial lawyers tend to fill the gaps created by ambiguity. So if you can argue about what is necessary to keep people safe, even though the standard changed over time, and nobody knew you needed to do X until 8 months later, it doesn't matter. The plaintiff's lawyer is still going to take advantage of the fact that you didn't do X. So what we did is we passed a bill that said you can safely reopen. You will not be sued for negligence because somebody who entered your store place later says, I think I got COVID there and my grandmother got it and my grandmother passed away, so I'm going to sue you for wrongful death. Well, that's an impossible negative to prove, right? How are you ever going to prove they didn't get COVID there when it's in the environment all around us? So with some protections for folks in terms of knowing what they're stepping into, like putting a sign on the door that says, hey, masks are required here, social distancing is required here, that then allows people to know what kind of risk they're assuming. So as long as a business owner, makes it reasonably clear what they're going to be stepping into, then there's no liability for lawsuits brought on the basis of contracting COVID. So the point being, nothing would be more of a travesty in my mind than having our business community limping through this notion of shut down, or you can open, you can't reopen. The sort of the on again, off again nature of our reopening here in North Carolina, to survive all that, only to be shut down and forced into bankruptcy because lawsuits are being brought. And as you know, we have small businesses that can't afford to defend themselves if a lawsuit is brought against them. So we wanted to protect our business community against that, but it goes further. It goes to education as well. We didn't want our schools being sued because a child got COVID. Maybe they got it, maybe they didn't at the school.
Right. One of the things we talked about off air was King Roy, a.k.a. Vito Cooperoni. That's my new nickname for him, is Vito Cooperoni, because he's like King Vito over there. It's interesting to me that the Senate and the House would want to protect the most vulnerable in our society, mainly the unborn and those that survive abortion. How tough was it for you knowing that, he was going to veto that and we didn't really have what it took to override that veto?
Yeah, so that was, I would say, the single worst day of my service in the Senate. So we passed a bill, very, very straightforward, and all it says is, if you have a child that survives an abortion attempt, so they're outside the womb, they're viable, and the abortion didn't work, what we're saying is you now have to protect that child. You need to get that child medical care just like you would anyone else who was injured. It passed the Senate, it passed the House, but Roy Cooper vetoed that bill. We then overrode the veto in the Senate, and I actually went over to the House and watched the vote take place over there, and the override failed by 1 or 2 votes. And I just got to say, Abdul, and to the audience, that I just don't understand how you can claim to be for vulnerable people in our society and support A, abortion, or B, this wasn't even an anti-abortion law, it was a Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act. This child had survived an abortion attempt, and yet the Democrats were not willing to provide care to that child.
Right. That's something I think a lot of people need to consider, is that we have strong advocates on the Republican side of the aisle.
Yes,
You know, I know that you've, pride yourself on being able to work across the aisle with certain folks without compromising your core values, and I know a lot of us appreciate that. Just a quick pivot here. We talked about, lawsuits, protections, and things for that nature, but I want to bring it a little bit more local, because I know a lot of the work you do is to, here in Senate District 36. A couple of quick things for the folks about some of the things that have been accomplished most recently that impact us here locally.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I'm always thinking about Cabarrus County. I'm thinking about our local leaders, my colleagues in the House, when I'm making decisions and thinking about bills to bring forward. And one of the things that occurred to me, really, Steve Morris gave me this idea, and this is a passion of his. But we have Franklin Park here in Cabarrus County, a crown jewel of sort of the quality of life we have here, and probably most of your listeners and viewers have taken their kids there, been there, walked the trails. It's a beautiful park.
Right.
But the state owns the land. We in Cabarrus County do not own that land, but we make capital investments in that land. So the local government became nervous that, over time they're spending real local tax dollars on something they don't own. So we were successful passing a bill that put ownership of that land in the county, into the taxpayers of Cabarrus County. So we now own Franklin Park, and we don't have to be concerned about political or other changes in Raleigh. And so our investments are secure in the park. Similarly, we have property, most folks who grew up here know all about it, but it's called Jackson Training Facility. And that has some old buildings. In fact, Jackson, people don't know this, but Jackson Training Facility was actually the first juvenile justice reform ever undertaken in North Carolina. We had a gentleman who saw, I believe it was a 13-year-old boy, be sentenced to, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but it's directionally correct, 3.5 years of hard labor with hardened criminals for stealing what amounted to be essentially a lollipop. He said that was wrong. Let's create Jackson Training Facility. Let's train these kids in a trade and how to farm and so forth. So it served that purpose for many, many years. First criminal justice reform we had in North Carolina. But the buildings that constituted that campus are dilapidated, they're unsafe. But guess what? There is Preservation NC that thinks some of them are worth preserving for historical reference. So there are a few of the buildings they're interested in. They want to form a public-private partnership with a developer. Those that can't be saved can be put on the tax rolls. They could be developed and put on the tax rolls. So that's an important win for Cabarrus County. That land is now Cabarrus County's. It's no longer the state. So the state has now transferred those 2 important parcels to us. And probably the most important thing for taxpayers to hear is that it didn't cost taxpayers a dime.
Fantastic. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from not only our state house rep, but we have our good state senator here. A couple of things you guys got to take away from talking to these folks, especially if you're one of those people that's like right in the middle. We're talking about strong advocates to protect life. We're talking about strong advocates to protect your local businesses. And we're talking about folks that care about you as a citizen of this district, regardless if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or unaffiliated. So ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank Dr. Baker and Senator Newton for stopping by Ground Game. Give us a minute and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Ground Game, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I am Abdul Ali, and I'm telling you, we covered a lot of ground in today's episode, a lot of important information. We can't thank Dr. Baker and Senator Newton enough for dropping by. two folks that really care about Cabarrus County and want to make sure we're heading in the right direction. As always, your office is open every Tuesday and Thursday from 3 to 6 p.m. One of the most important things you can do is come by, go on Facebook to our Facebook page, or visit cabarrus.gop and get yourself a voter guide so that your Republican friends in the county know who deserves your vote. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, your Cabarrus County headquarters is at 96 McGill Avenue here in Concord. Can't wait to see you next time. For my man G Mills behind the camera and your Cabarrus County Republican Party, I'm Abdul Ali. This is Ground Game. We'll check you next time.